Hello there, welcome to my review of the Rockford Files Season 1, Episode 2, The Dark and Bloody Ground. Written by Juanita Bartlett and Roy Huggins and directed by Michael Schultz. The episode begins with all three of the emergency services attending a fire at a motel complex. A woman runs to the scene as they wheel out a corpse on a stretcher. Remarkably, they let her approach the body and have a look, which seems a little unbelievable, even for the 70s. But her reaction tells us she knows the dead man. We then cut to Jim's trailer, where his sometimes lawyer, sometimes lover, and sometimes client, Beth Davenport, is explaining the woman we saw has been arrested for the man's murder, as he was dead before the fire started, and she wants Jim to prove her innocent. Which he is reluctant to do because working for Beth often leaves him poorer than not working for Beth.
Look, the last time we worked together, I not only didn't make any money, I had to refinance my car.
Beth Davenport is played by Gretchen Corbett, and it is her first appearance on the show. This episode originally aired on the 20th of September 1974, and if you'd been watching the premiere episode of Columbo, An Exercise in Fatality, just 5 days earlier, you would have seen Corbett in a very different role, as Milo Janice's bikini-clad secretary/lover, Jessica Conroy, who leaves Columbo lost for words.
Yes?
I'm looking for, Milo Janice.
As Janice was known to exercise on Rockford's beach, it's possible that Beth was leading an unusual double life. Eventually, she convinces Jim to meet with the woman, Anne Calhoun, and because she knows he's a soft-hearted soul, the meeting convinces him to take the case. After a visit with Becca, where Dennis is convinced of her guilt, Jim is convinced of her innocence. Becca also lets Jim know Mr. Calhoun's hands were burned and he recently gate-crashed an exclusive party. These seemingly unimportant details are actually crucial to cracking the case, but are delivered in such a way as to seem trivial or even purposely useless.
It was supposed to look like an accident. She planted a cigarette in his right hand. It was burned. The fire spreads across his torso and burns the other hand. Who else had a motive?
Somebody at that big party they went to in Bel Air.
He crashed that party. We checked it out.
This is another brilliant example of the quality of the writing. While Mrs. Calhoun being allowed to see the body at the scene isn't that believable, its real purpose within the story is to show us that she identified the body and therefore his fingerprints being burned was not done to disguise the identity of the corpse to fake his death, but it was done on purpose. Rockford meets Beth for lunch and gets her to agree to at least pay his expenses.
You pay my expenses, and if I prove that Anne Calhoun is innocent, you pay my expenses plus $200 a day.
All right, we have a deal.
Good.
Here we see not only does he enjoy chili as much as Columbo, but that he also has a penchant for spicy food, something not that common at the time. He then takes a trip to Arizona to check out Mr. Calhoun's details. Long before the internet, the only way to find information on someone was to go to the place where the records were kept, whether that be a town's hall of records or the local newspaper office. He must be onto something though, because he's being followed. As he makes his way back to California, he's pursued by a Mack truck cab that tries to run him off the road. The choice of using a truck is another great storytelling device, as we are clearly shown the driver in a few shots, but Rockford can't see him due to the height of the cab, meaning we are supposed to see who's driving, but he's not. Eventually, Jim loses his would-be killer on a bridge with a width limit, and he stops at a gas station to report the attack, where he has a very funny scene as he strong-arms the attendant into giving him a dime for the phone.
Somebody just tried to kill me. I need a dime.
Well, fill her up. You might have some change coming.
Give me a dime. I'm going to crack you open like a piggy bank.
All right.
The attendant is played by Mark Alamo, who may be familiar to Star Trek fans as he played 4 roles on The Next Generation, and, perhaps more well-known, Gul Dukat on Deep Space Nine. The local police are less than sympathetic to his assault. The officer he speaks to is played by character actor Tom Bower, who has a plethora of credits to his name, but who I know best as Marvin in Die Hard 2. With no chance of justice being served, with the local police not really wanting to do anything, Jim returns home, only to be threatened as he steps into his darkened trailer.
Hold it right where you are. Now don't make a move. Put your hands up.
Luckily, it's only Rocky being overly cautious.
I'm just keeping an eye on the joint. You know how it's always getting all tore up every time you ain't around.
Rocky might be naive, but he's also very astute here, really nailing down the inherent contradictions in Rockford's personality that further suggests that he does what he does because he wants to help others, not because it's a particularly lucrative living.
But for a man who doesn't like to get stomped on, you are in the wrong line of work.
The next day, Jim takes his expenses to Beth, and as they leave to visit Mrs. Calhoun, someone has tampered with the Firebird's brakes. After this brief scare, Jim explains to Mrs. Calhoun that there's no record of her husband, Kevin Calhoun's existence before he met her. She's baffled by this, but tells Jim that she and her husband didn't crash the party.
Kevin must have known someone because he was invited.
Beth convinces Jim to look into the party hosts who accuse the Calhouns of gatecrashing, and he finds them, Elizabeth Gorman and Clyde Russell, the widow of an author whose husband's book is being turned into a major motion picture, and her lawyer. They are at the racetrack along with the man who was driving the truck, Elizabeth's fiancé, Elliot Malcolm. Of course, Jim doesn't know this. Jim then uses a brilliant ruse to get Malcolm to admit the Calhouns didn't crash the party, by claiming that he did.
I had a guard on every door. Nobody got into that party that I did not want at that party.
You make it sound impossible.
It was impossible.
Nobody crashed the party. Not me. Not Kevin Calhoun.
The scenes of Rockford conning information out of people are some of the most fun, and really adds to the uniqueness of the series. He's got a brilliant mind, but in such an understated way, it's often overlooked by other characters and viewers. That evening, Beth comes to see Jim in his trailer, claiming to have cracked the case.
A company can buy a book for $1 million, but when the copyright renewal time comes up, if the author has died, they don't own it.
Which is what happened with Elizabeth Gorman. Her husband wrote the book of the episode title, The Dark and Bloody Ground, and he sold the rights to a film company to have the film produced.
They were halfway through the picture when her husband died. That's when Clyde Russell moved in.
I have heard it debated that this was invented for the show, but after some research I've discovered that this seems to have basically been the case when the show was made. Section 24 of Title 17 has since been repealed. In fact, the law changed in 1978, not long after this episode aired, and so no longer applies to any works post-1978. How that connects to the murder of Kevin Calhoun is not only something that it remains a mystery to Beth, but to us as well. But when Clyde Russell calls Jim to arrange a meeting with him, it's possible that mystery is about to be solved. Except when Jim and Beth arrive at Russell's home, Russell is floating in the pool as if he's got on the wrong side of Norma Desmond, and it's not long before someone is taking shots at them. Elliot Malcolm, who makes his escape in his E-Type Jaguar with Jim in hot pursuit. Malcolm is not quite as good a driver as Jim Rockford is and crashes and is sent to the hospital, but remains tight-lipped about his involvement in the whole thing. By this time, however, Jim has figured it out and goes to see Elizabeth Gorman.
Kevin Calhoun was Steve Gorman. When he heard about the movie, he showed up here to get his slice of the money. And you killed him to protect your interests.
Elizabeth had Malcolm kill him, burning his hands so his fingerprints wouldn't give away who he really was. Anne Calhoun is cleared and Rockford fails to get his expenses, or his services paid for. Beth getting one over on him yet again.
Oh, don't be ridiculous, Jim. I'm going to pay you for your services and your expenses, just as soon as Anne Calhoun pays me.
This is another great episode. The plot is perhaps overly complicated, with certain details being thrown in and out quite quickly, but the overall story is pretty easy to follow. It's not helped by copyright law being so incredibly complicated now, let alone in 1974 when it was even more of a minefield. But I think you can ignore that and still enjoy the story. The car chases are also perhaps overly long, but if you're not a fan of car chases, then maybe this show isn't for you. The chemistry between Garner and Corbett is perfect, and really lays out why they deserve each other, and why they made a terrible couple. Both with their hearts in the right place, but too conniving to not constantly get on each other's nerves. I really enjoyed this episode, but there were one or two things that I think could have been done better, so this is a 4 out of 5 from me. Thank you. Goodbye.